Hello and welcome to Split Your Head. I'm your host, Bob, and today's special guest is Kelly Gredner, a fellow podcaster, writer, and active voice within the horror community. She can be found hosting I Spit on Your podcast alongside Jessica Nicole, where they cover a wide range of horror and horror-adjacent topics. However, it was Our Bloody Obsession, a podcast she co-hosted with Zoe Rose Smith, where I first discovered her biting criticism and unwavering reverence for extreme horror. As that insightful series has come to an end, she's about to start her own transgressive podcast called Taboo Terrors. Originally an offshoot of I Spit on Your podcast, Kelly is expanding this into her own exploration of depraved cinema. So naturally, I had to get her on to pick her brain and see what this new podcast is going to be all about. Kelly, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a long time coming, and we both are fellow Torontonians, if that's okay for me to reveal that. So this is actually our first time talking, like looking face to face. So
visually, yes, I know.
Right.
We're just like, we should go for drinks. That's the classic adult thing to do, right? Let's get together 6 months later. Oh,
time flies.
It does.
You've been very busy doing all these various podcasts, and you've been hyping up Taboo Terrors for a while. So, what's the plan for Taboo Terrors?
So, Taboo Terrors, I actually started as a writing gig under the umbrella of Spinsters of Horror. That's my horror project with Jess. And 2019, I started writing, doing kind of like mini reviews, dissections on the website. And then I dabbled in some audio podcast work for Taboo Terrors, a couple of interviews, a couple of what I called shock talks. And I also started Disturbing Films for a Curious Mind series with Jess because she had a curious mind for disturbing movies. Hence the name. Yeah. And so she would edit all of those, and it just was a lot of work for her to do both. So I stopped it and just wanted to focus on I Spit on Your podcast. So that's kind of where it stayed, those old episodes, old writings and everything. And then because our Bloody Obsession unfortunately came to an end, I think prematurely, I was like, I still need to be out there. I still need to have my voice out there. There's not many podcasts covering these types of movies, and definitely very few women, if none at all, talking about this as well. So I have a very clear kind of plan for it, and probably overthink the movies that I'm going to cover. But I just want to specifically curate really interesting, diverse movies that showcase what the genre can really show us.
Yeah. Well, okay. Can I ask, and I'll edit this out if this is bad, but why Our Bloody Obsession came to an end? Is there a reason that you put out in the public, or?
Yeah. So Zoe was, unfortunately, life happens, and Zoe was just having a avalanche of shit happening, and she just couldn't commit anymore, which is really too bad. I get it. We even were on a break for 6 months because my life was a shit avalanche. And so we kind of reconvened. We're like, okay, we're ready to get this back going. We did one episode of season 2 for body horror. That was our Mermaid in a Manhole episode. And then she just had to call it quits. So it's unfortunate, but I learned a lot from it. And I did a lot of work for that. So I kind of took everything I've learned and I enjoyed from Our Bloody Obsession and 6 years of I Spit on Your podcast to put into my own show again. And really, I was never really great with group work. I'm better as a solo artist. So this is my show. I'm in charge. I'm choosing the guests. I'm choosing the movies. And y'all just have to fucking like it.
Right.
And you will.
Well, we'll love it. We'll love it. We'll tune in. It's going to be every month. Is that correct?
Yes. Once a month.
Okay. That's perfect. And as I was going to say, because, you're going to have guests on there, and I'm assuming things are still cool with Zoe, maybe she can come on for a little reunion episode.
Oh, yeah. She'll be back, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yes. I know the handful of movies she just loves talking about. So if I talk about Sallow, I'm like, all right, Zoe, let's do this.
Right. And I remember she would always talk a lot about Tumbling Doll of Flesh. Was she the one to introduce you to that one?
No, I've heard about Tumbling Doll of Flesh for a long time. Okay. It just only for Our Bloody Obsession did I finally be like, all right. It's time to sit down with this one and see what it's all about. Because it's infamous, so.
Yeah. That was kind of the same thing for me, where I had heard about it for such a long time, and then it wasn't until hearing the episode that you guys did covering that one where I was like, I gotta watch this movie because I'm sure same with you. Like you saw that cover years ago and was like,
oh, yes.
okay, that is to me the most terrifying cover I've ever seen of an extreme horror film. Like they nailed it, and you're kind of waiting the whole film until that point comes. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's good that we have shows like yours, like our Bloody Obsession, to kind of get people to like finally watch these films, But I mean, I really want to get into like what brought you to extreme horror, and if you want to walk me back to like the origins of you discovering just like normal horror films, and if it was like this slippery slope, like how did it all start?
How did I find myself in the trash bin? So I am 40 years old and I've been watching horror movies since I was probably 10. So, 30 years of horror loving, horror watching, like throwing epic slumber parties with all my gal friends, the days of renting videos, VHS at the video store. We'd grab like 6 to 7 to 8 of them and just like throw them on. So that was, early 90s. I really cut my teeth on 80s horror, predominantly the slashers, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street. We watched Hellraiser. We watched Pet Sematary, just like anything we could get our hands on. A turning point for me as a horror fan was 1996 when Scream came out, because around that time, I think I'm like 15. And I can now actually go to the theater and see movies. So The Craft, Scream 2, 1999, The Blair Witch Project. Like, I was there going to the cinema as much as I possibly could for horror movies. I'm a massive fan of 90s teen screams. They're like my favorite horror cycle. Love that. Not very depraved of me, I know, but we have layers. We all have layers,
but it's
right?
Good stuff. It's good stuff. I mean, I watch Scream. I'm not making this up, once a week for an entire year when I first discovered it, and I got the VHS. I was obsessed with that movie. So I totally get it. Yeah, it's excellent.
Right? And it's a comfort movie. It's like a top 5 horror film. Like, I still watch it probably a few times a year. And that's been going on for almost like for so long. But even at the time, I had this group of friends, like me and my boyfriend, my best friend Lisa and her boyfriend. We'd watch it like in her basement, like every weekend. We knew all the lines. I know all the words still. We had our roles. I was Sydney. She was Tatum. Like it was like this whole social thing. And that's what really wonderful is really wonderful about horror is the social aspect of it. It's a group activity so often. It's so much fun to enjoy them together. So I'll say jump forward many, many years of watching a lot of conventional horror, a lot of mainstream horror, some indie stuff, but, watching a lot more stuff, let's say Rue Morgue would cover. I had a Rue Morgue subscription for many years. So I was really, on top of things for a long time. Not anymore. Because I've gone off the rails now for what I'm doing, but why I actually got to this point is really interesting because it was when I didn't realize this until I watched Jesse Seitz and Marcus Cook's Beyond Horror documentary about Red Films. And so they had this interview with Stephen Byro from Unearthed Films where he was saying, he's like, well, after so many years of watching horror movies, you start to think like, what's next? What else is there? That just really stuck with me because I was like, again, watching horror movies for 30 years, like nothing scares me anymore. Like everything's predictable, everything, like so much is predictable. It's not as interesting anymore. So I just needed something with a little more edge to it. And that's kind of just where I'm getting in my own life and my own interests. Like my musical interests have changed and it's just been a really interesting journey. And I've really found my place in the extreme cinema community and with these movies because they absolutely fascinate me. And I mean, I'm here for for all these reasons. So it's just, I feel like just really where I should be.
Yeah. I think for me, extreme horror, I agree. It's like, even if I don't always love it, I always do find it kind of fascinating. And there's something about it that like it's almost easier to talk about versus just as you said, like more conventional horror. I don't know as well, like, because I think we're around the same age. Like, did you grow up kind of going online and reading about disturbing horror films, and that was kind of like whetting your appetite? It was sort of just like, do I want to open Pandora's box? You know, do you know what I mean? Like, did you have those kind of experiences growing up like I did?
Well, I mean, less of the movies than it was like Rotten.com. You know, the classic, real gore stuff. Yeah. Like that was fascinating, that morbid curiosity. But I don't remember really knowing about like the film world until I had a partner, and this is probably now going back like 10 years ago, who was also into real gore. But loved disturbing films. So about 10 years ago, I started dabbling in it. So that's when I watched August Underground, Headless, a Serbian film. I don't even remember what else we watched. But, you know, if there was a list of like the most disturbing films ever made, he would be like, let's watch these. I was like, okay, let's do this. So I found it interesting then. So it like was in my head, and then we broke up and like years went by and I just kept thinking about it. And then I found Zoe's podcast, and having a woman talk about these movies and be so vocal about her interest in them and love of them, and listening to her podcast. And I was like, okay, this is really getting me into it. And then I started Kelly's Taboo Terrors in 2019 to really start focusing down on them as something just another level of interest in horror.
Okay, interesting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So for you, it was like you never really had that period where it was like reading about it and kind of trying to like work up the bravery to engage with it.
Not that I remember. No, I was so into just like going to the theater and seeing whatever hot horror movie was out. Yeah.
Well, it almost, I mean, this is probably, I hope this analogy doesn't come out bad, but it makes me think of like you were getting into drugs and you're going harder and harder, right? But there isn't like, for me, getting into extreme horror was very much like daring myself. You know, it's like, because I remember, before I saw Cannibal Holocaust, I bought Jungle Holocaust because I was like, okay, I hear Jungle Holocaust isn't as bad as Cannibal Holocaust. I'll start a Jungle Holocaust, and if I can handle that, I'll watch Cannibal Holocaust. And it's like, you didn't have that at all. You were just like, next, please, you know, like, like I'll just keep
much. Wow. Okay. Yes, please, sir. Can I have some more?
Right. You just like serve it up.
Give it to me. And I was like, yes, next.
Okay. So then for you, like, what was the scariest stuff you had seen as you were getting into horror films? Like, what were like the more conventional horror films that like terrified you back in the day when you're getting into horror?
I'll say the last couple of times that I actually felt fear watching horror movies was probably 18, 19 years ago. In my very first basement apartment here in Toronto, I watched Paranormal Activity, Wreck, and The Changeling for the first time. There was like this period of watching movies, and I was like, excuse me? Terrified, like throwing my cats across the couch because I was terrified. Fear, actual fear. There's been a couple of movies that, you know, I got the Wiggins a little bit, like I get my spidey sense would be up a little bit, but definitely nothing. I have not felt fear in a long time. So looking for that next fix.
But do you think extreme horror is like where you would find that now?
Definitely the itch. The fear, I wouldn't say fear. Like there's fear, and then there's like this unsettled, disturbed feeling. And there was a moment when I actually watched The Devil's Candy for the first time where I got not fear, but like a moment of like, I feel unsafe.
Okay. That's like a demon film though, right? I haven't seen that one.
Yes.
It's like demonic? Okay. Interesting.
Yes, it's like a demonic, some possession in it. Possession sometimes can, you know, my back gets up a little bit because I grew up on The Exorcist, like
that,
like when traumatized me for life.
Oh, when I was so that was actually, and going back to what I was saying earlier about how I'd read about films and have to like work my way up. And The
Yeah.
Exorcist was one that I was so terrified by the concept that I didn't see it until I was like 16, I think, because I actually at night would be like, well, yeah, sure, but it's like I wasn't even raised religious, and I was terrified about this idea of being like possessed.
Yep.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So that would happen often for me as a kid. Like Blair Witch Project was like that, of like you're reading about this film and then it kind of like instills a fear in you. And you saw that when it came out, but it didn't really like make an impact or anything.
Sorry, which one? The Blair Witch?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that scared the crap out of me. Absolutely. Right, I thought it was real. Remember the old viral marketing at the time. That scared the crap out of me. I still have a hard time watching that and The Exorcist alone. Like, I still have a hard time. I have that like anticipatory dread. Okay. I'm like, I know it's gonna happen, and I just yeah.
right. Yeah, but it's hard to find that now. That kind of like that sort of fear that affects you. And for me, it's like the idea of like something scaring you so much you can't sleep at night. Like that seemed to kind of happen to me a lot as a kid.
Yes. Or when you go to the bathroom, you have to open the shower curtain. You have to open the windows so you can kind of make sure that there's nobody looking in. Like, that's what I'm talking about, like the fear. Like, so I haven't felt that watching horror movies anyways. Sometimes I watch some like videos on YouTube about, but it's usually the real life stuff of like froggers and people living in your attics that come out and watch you while you sleep. And I'm like, oh.
Wait, what's a frogger?
Frogging.
Wait, what did you say? Frogger?
It is. It's called frogging. It's PHROGGING. Frogging.
Okay.
It's where people live in your house without knowing it. So it's like they live in an attic or like a crawl space, and they come out at night.
Yeah.
And you don't know that they live there.
Okay, so you will read about that. You'll watch a YouTube video, and that will scare you now. More so than actually watching.
Oh yeah.
So more so than watching a horror film, really.
Yes.
Okay.
These days it's like the real stuff.
Sure. But I think I'm kind of linking this then to how I think a lot of people will engage with extreme horror, and that they'll read about it and they'll discover things like the Disturbing Iceberg, where it's sort of putting this content in almost in the same kind of context that you're experiencing these things like frogging in a way, and I think that's something that's always been kind of like fascinating to me about extreme horror, is that it's sort of like always putting itself in this status that is sort of like dangerous in a sense, like something that people will just feel like I can only read about it, Does that make sense? Okay.
Absolutely. It's like that feeling of, should I actually be watching this? Like, is this okay for me to be witnessing? And it's just a movie, but you still have that disturbed, unsettled feeling of maybe I should not actually be engaging in this.
Yeah.
But I kind of love that feeling.
Yeah, I do too, to some extent. I mean, as long as you know deep down that it hasn't crossed any like intense ethical lines or anything. But I think what was interesting about the Disturbing Iceberg list was that there was quite a few films on the list that did potentially have like illegal content on them, or that was sort of what was being mythologized about it. And I think that that's something that's kind of like adding to the mystique of extreme horror in a way, is the fact that people think like, what if I do stumble on like real snuff footage or something? You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think that also comes with this kind of weird negative stereotype or a stigma against it, because when you're talking about the iceberg, really the only movies that have like real stuff that might be unethical is the bottom tier, at least 1 to 2, the last 2 tiers, where it's really pornography and fetish work. So there's, Squirm Fest, where girls are like eating live worms and maybe puking them up and then eating them. So stuff like that, maybe some animal stuff. But but I wouldn't necessarily call them films. It's just like fetish. It's fetish work. It's pornography. So I don't really think those movies should be actually on that list, because everybody else is like, it's cinema. There's generally a narrative. There's, you know, a point. I mean, sex and arousal is also a point. I'm not, you know, yucking anybody's yum, but there's a stark difference between watching like a movie, like a, you know, like an actual movie than there is watching pornography.
Right.
You know? So I think people get that negative kind of connotation that that's what these movies are going to be about, but it's not necessarily true.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I feel like I never thought about it like that, where it's like the stuff at the bottom, you shouldn't be viewing it in the same perspective as the stuff at the top, because the stuff at the top is designed like a horror film to shock you. So what's happening at the bottom is more like content that shouldn't be necessarily consumed in that way, you know? But it is still being sought out by people who are into extreme horror, which again, I find really fascinating. Is that something that maybe you would get into for Taboo Terrors?
Absolutely. Like, nothing is going to be left uncovered. You know, there's
nothing.
Nothing. Mixtapes, Mondo films, fetish work. Absolutely. Like, I like a lot of stuff. And there's still stuff that I haven't even explored fully, so I'm excited to do that. Yeah, what was one point I wanted to make for sure is, and kind of in relation to what we were just talking about, is I think a lot of these movies are hard for people to understand, quotations, get, because they're hard to watch. They challenge you on so many levels, but I find so many merit, and I find merit pretty much in almost every movie in this realm that I've watched. But you kind of have to like parse through the very challenging taboo subject matter and really kind of fucked up things that you're watching to get to the quote, the point, to quote, get it, or to get something out of it. And not everybody's willing to do that, which I completely understand. A lot of people call it like an endurance test, because it does take, it can take a lot out of you to watch some of these movies. But I think there's a lot of really wonderful films out there that people just don't give a chance to because of how challenging they are to watch, which again, like I said, I understand, but I think sometimes it's too bad.
Yeah, I mean, from, you know, the articles I've read by you that you've written, I feel like, you know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the point that you are generally looking for is like this kind of like catharsis in a way, where, you know, the extreme content, the visual content, and then the actual themes kind of like collide and eventually bring you to a point where it's like, wow, that really redeemed something about the film for me. Or, you know, something of that nature. I don't know if that's at all correct, or...
Yeah, I would definitely say that, but the catharsis of just living in this life as a person, as a woman, as a vegan, as a vet tech, as a chronically ill person, like... I range from being super humanitarian to being absolutely misanthropic. It wavers. Yeah. And I have hard days. But, you know, sometimes these films really help with those very negative feelings. Yeah. So that's kind of been a good aspect of my exploration into it. But also just enjoying the transgressiveness, like the art form of it overall. Again, sometimes I find beauty and interesting things from a movie, whereas somebody else might find it boring. Quotations. They might find it boring, but I might be like, whoa, 4 stars. Like, whew, you know, but I've now kind of come to this place of analysis, and I spit on your podcast. It's like, it's hard for me sometimes
like
now.
It's a bad thing, though. I mean, analysis is good.
I know it is, but sometimes, and I'm good. I usually have my brain shut off, but then sometimes it like, oh, you're seeing something here. Like this movie called Suicide Dolls, which is one of 3 films of, and I didn't write down the filmmaker's name, but he did Tumbling Doll of Flesh, My Red Guts, Women's Flesh, and then he did Suicide Dolls. So only 3 films. And I finally was able to see Suicide Dolls, and I've become good friends with Goblin O'Reilly over at Quality Violence Cinema. So he hooked me up with Suicide Dolls. He's like, I thought it was boring. You might like it though. So I watched it and I was like, oh, this is about female isolation and women's loneliness and how we have to go through everything alone. And I was like, whoa, like this was intense for me. Like I got a lot out of it. But, you know, like everybody's, it's all going to be different. We're all going to take away different things from it based on our experiences. But I kind of love that too, where people are like, this is boring. I was like, whoa, I loved it. Wow, that like hit something in me, you know.
Well, did you find Suicide Dolls was disturbing at all or like shocking in any way?
I found it more disturbing just how sad it was.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Because I'm wondering when Goblin, and I don't want to put any words in his mouth here, but like if he found it boring, it's because maybe he didn't like deliver that sort of shock he was hoping it would. Because I mean, Tumbling Dolls of Flesh is just so shocking and disturbing. So I'd expect any film by that director would be kind of like
yes. Shit. I would say comparatively, it's much tamer than Tumbling Doll of Flesh, and even Women, I keep mixing up the name. Terrible. Women's Flesh, My Red Guts. There it is. Women's Flesh, My Red Guts.
Women's Flesh.
But it was just more melancholic, sad, because it's just really like 3 to 4 stories of women committing suicide.
Oh, okay.
So,
yeah, that's kind of like that. I haven't seen this film, but the York Buckley film, Der Todeskin, I think, is also kind of along the same lines. Have you seen that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just about
you would say they're
death.
Comparative? Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's about not everybody's committing suicide. It's just about people dying. It's like an anthology of death. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Huh.
Some there is some suicide there. So.
Okay. I think I was told by someone that it was all just constant suicide, you know? So,
I have seen a movie about that as well.
Was it called Suicide?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I saw that one back in the day, back like 2005 or 6 when it came out on, I think Trauma put it out.
Yes, they did. Absolutely, they did. It's kind of fucked. Like, you wouldn't think it. Like, sometimes trauma can go to places, but what suicide is about is these people going around to film. They've got consent from the people wanting to commit suicide to film it. And so you just watch this movie of people doing that. I think there was like a sinister plot between the two people that were filming it, and I don't remember exactly what that was. But like, that's intense. It's intense. Yeah. And there's all these different reasons. And
when did you watch it?
I watched that probably a year and a half ago on Troma streaming.
Okay. Because I got it on DVD when it first came out, and I totally forgot it existed until like a year ago, maybe going over was it Effed Up Movies, and it was just like seeing the cover there. I was like, oh, I owned that at one point. I completely forgot that film existed.
Oh, wow.
It's like,
yeah, the cover's kind of lame.
Yeah,
it doesn't really give you the full. I don't even know how you necessarily could. I mean, it's not a Tumbling Doll of Flesh cover, so it's not that memorable. No. It kind of looks like it's going to be this lame, like, screen life horror, but it's not.
Yeah. So. Yeah. I guess it did seem a little ahead of its time in that way. Mm-hmm. Because what did you say? Screen life horror, like kind of like more found footagey horror stuff that we've kind of seen pop up more in the last decade or so.
Yes.
So, yeah, it was sort of ahead of its time in that regard, you know. But I think, if I remember correctly, it's like maybe stuck a little too closely to like the whole gimmick of it, of just like suicide. And then I think, as you said, like, the couple has sort of like a falling out or something, and like maybe they kill each other. I don't know.
I think so, which is not the most interesting part of the story, but like, it was pretty intense. I was kind of surprised. Because sometimes that happens. I was like, oh, wow, that was actually much darker than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. I mean, you do seem to have, like, very unique tastes when it comes to extreme horror. Like, the films that you recommended I watch for this, for preparing for this were, like, a few that I was really surprised about that, like, oh, no one really talks about that one. Or the one film, I Am Trash, which completely blew me away. I never even heard of it before. And that one was also kind of, I mean, it sounds so condescending, but it felt like there was a level of intelligence to it that I wasn't really expecting, I guess. I don't know if you know what I mean.
I do, and I understand. I know you and I kind of chatted a bit about this offline, but that whole it's the Bad Family trilogy, the Korean films and the Korean filmmaker that I think I just stumbled across it, and I watched, and then because I usually, if I'm browsing through movies, I always look up on Letterboxd, or I like look it up online and be like, okay, well, what is this movie about? Like, what am I kind of getting myself into, just so I know? Because sometimes I'm disappointed because I thought maybe it's going to be more disturbing than I personally thought it was. But I looked it up and I was like, oh, it's a trilogy. Well, that's interesting. And it's, mother is a whore, father is a dog, I am trash. And I was like, oh, I like it. I like a good trilogy. But I was very, very impressed by them. But I'm usually impressed by South Korean films anyways. But yeah, this true. One was really, really very dark. Very dark.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about rewatching it for this, but I thought, it's up here for now. But I do want to rewatch them because I'm definitely going to want to cover them at some point for the pod because they're just really incredible. And I'm glad you watched it.
Yeah, no, I'm glad I watched it too. I mean, we spoke a few times, I think, about it has one scene, and I don't want to spoil it for anyone because I do urge people to check it out. But there's one scene in particular that's just like one of the scariest scenes I think I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm gonna go on record saying that. I don't know if you'd agree.
It definitely is ranking up there with one of the worst things I've ever seen. And I think I sat there and I was like, no, like visceral reaction. And I think that's another word I'll throw out there is that I'm looking for a visceral reaction now when I watch movies, which I don't generally get from conventional horror anymore. But these, I'm like shouting at the screen. Like that's a big deal. But yeah, that was it was very intense.
I think what I really liked about it though was it also, like I know it's more in line of like an extreme horror kind of scene, but it did feel almost like conventionally terrifying as well in terms of just the way it was like executed and how like it made that character seem like this monster in a way and not just, I mean, yes, a depraved individual, but also this like almost otherworldly monster that it would be. And this is like the worst thing you could ever imagine happening to a character happens in that scene. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Like in very few movies tend to do that to re-traumatize their audience and the person in the scene and the person in the movie. But they definitely were really great at like building that tension and like building up to that point. And it 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, so I would recommend everyone watch I Am Trash, and I gotta get around to watching the other 2 films. It's Mother is a Whore, Father is a Dog.
Yes, and they're not related. They're separate stories. But I would say I Am Trash is probably objectively the most disturbing out of the 3. They all kind of have moments. And I don't know the ins and outs of like Korean society and Korean culture, but I remember on Letterboxd somebody was bringing up about these movies and like I Am Trash about how patriarchal, South Korea is, and the comment on family and masculinity. And I haven't sat down so much with that yet, but I think there is a lot of that in that trilogy, the Bad Family trilogy, that would be really interesting to explore and dissect. So again, I think there's something going on in these films, but you have to get through the really fucked up sexual assault and all the other stuff that goes on with them to like get to, the underneath. It's hard to get through the bad stuff over top to get to like, that catharsis underneath.
Right. But you feel it, which is important, even if you don't fully understand why you feel something. And I think that to me speaks to like good quality filmmaking.
Exactly.
But maybe Taboo Terrors episode, I don't know, or like 10 or something, you do the 3 films maybe if there's like a friend that you know or someone you know who's like, South Korean that can come on and
absolutely.
speak to it.
Yep.
What kind of guests do you have in mind lined up for the show?
So along with really giving a lot of thought to the movies I want to cover, I'm trying to get guests that, exactly like what you're saying, would be a good person to have for a specific movie. So really putting a lot of thought into that. So Goblin O'Reilly from Quality Violence Cinema is going to come on, definitely. So I asked him, and he was very excited for it. For erotic, it's his Italian director, Domazanio Cristofaro, who did House of Flesh Mannequins and a bunch of other movies that I'm now forgetting, but he did erotic. And I specifically reached out to this writer named John Patterson because he actually wrote about the movie, and he is a bisexual man, and he wrote about the queerness of erotic. So I definitely wanted to bring him to talk about his very unique perspective of that movie. I've reached out to Marcus Cook to come on for a shot on video film called Garotica, because when I was saying that I was watching it on social media, he really jumped in. He was like, I love this movie. So I messaged him, and he's like, I know the director. We're working on something together. I love this movie. Da da da. I was like, all right, let's have you on. So I want to have a blend of like really great specific guests for certain movies for whatever reason, whether they have a special interest, they really love it, they have a hand in it, like whichever. Just something that just people that I know will make for a great conversation and an episode. So it's going to be diverse of just fans, of filmmakers, of academics. I've even got my I Spinner podcast co-host Jessica coming in on this season for a movie at the end. So
okay.
Yes.
You've kind of
she was honored to be asked.
With I can't remember what it's called. The Disturbing Movies for Curious Minds. That was what it was called, right?
That was, yes, the old thing that we used to do. Yeah, she's watched a lot on her own, so she's actually less of a newbie when it comes to this. So
right. But from the episodes I listened to, was like you were kind of subjecting her to her kind of like first extreme horror films. Okay,
yes.
So I'm not, I want to ask, but I'm not going to, because I'm sure it'll be like a big surprise. And who knows, maybe when it comes time to record it, she'll have watched like the most insane shit. And then you'll be like, well, then I gotta go harder, Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, she's kind of blown past that kind of newbie place. She is a massive fan of Japanese cinema, whether it's action, horror. And so she's been going through, she has a complete like Excel spreadsheet of this. God love her nerdiness. There's a Japanese horror iceberg. And so she's been going through this whole thing, and it has movies like Tumbling Doll of Flesh in it, because that is definitely integral to Japanese cinema. So every once in a while, she curates from this massive list, like this overnight marathon of disturbing Japanese films. So she's actually seen like a good amount of stuff. Not Tumbling Doll of Flesh yet. There's like levels upon levels that we're going to get there, but she's coming on for my Mary and Dora episode for this season on necrophilia. Because once I watched the movie, I was like, oh, yes. I was like, I think you're going to get a lot out of this. We watched it together, and she's like, I loved it. And I was like, all right, she's come to a new place.
Which movie was this?
It's called The Yearning of Maria D.
Okay.
It's from 2018.
Yeah. I've only seen, I think, one short film of his. He's someone I still haven't really dove into yet. And I guess I'm a little surprised because I guess maybe this is a good time to ask about it, because you are like a vegan, you're a vet and everything, and he's pretty notorious for, supposedly like hurting animals or killing animals in his films. Like, where do you stand on that?
Yeah, so I actually have befriended on social media a super fan of Mary and Dora's, and that's actually a bit of a misconception. Because I talked to him about this specifically. I mean, there's like some insect stuff that is real, but he uses footage or situations where the animals would have been killed anyways, and then it's filmed. So like slaughterhouses, well, those animals are going to be killed anyways, let's put it in the film. I have his film Carcinoma, and I believe in that has like a snake eating a live rabbit or something like that. And I was like, well, the snake's gotta eat. So it actually is seemingly a misconception that he actually does all this animal killing for his films, because that's what was really putting me off for quite a while.
Sure.
So if they're not actually being killed for the purpose of the movie, like let's say Cannibal Holocaust, Hannibal.
Yeah.
I love that. You know, so if he's not doing it just for the sake of the movie, will it be tough for me to watch? Absolutely. Do I have to watch it? No, but I'm not mad about it because I know it's happening anyways, you know, so it's not being done just for the sake of the film. So I'm fine with that. Anybody that does do it for the sake of film, doesn't seem like there's a lot, which is great. That's more of like, I'm a 70s Italian horror filmmaker that tends to do more of that stuff. But that was a long time ago, and I'm more mad about factory farming than I am about Cannibal Holocaust.
Sure. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Are you familiar with Calamity of Snakes?
Yep, watched that recently. That was horrifying. Absolutely horrifying.
Oh man, yeah.
Watching it was awful, and I was so happy when Unearthed Films brought it out, and there were proceeds of this purchases of these movies going to this snake conservation. I was like, you know what? Love you guys, because we know that that's fucked to actually be doing it. That's messed up. No, nobody would ever do that now.
No,
but like it is horrifying to watch.
Yeah, I
was like, Jess, do not watch this. Nobody watch this. I was like, this is really upsetting.
Yeah,
a lot of snake brutalizing and death.
There's even was it a mongoose scene?
Oh yes. It was a absolutely redonkulous kind of fun movie. If you take away the horrific nature of all the snake deaths, it was kind of fun.
Yeah, it's actually wait, it's like I think it was from Hong Kong. It's one of the Shaw Brothers films, and that's just like a whole you can't really go wrong with any Shaw Brothers films. Although I'm sure they were up to no good outside of all their snake killing and stuff. So, but is that like a potential episode you might focus on? Is the history of animal cruelty and extreme horror or transgressive
maybe
films?
I mean, that's definitely maybe not your regular kind of taboo, but I know that's something that is taboo, animal deaths for art. And it's even come up, honestly, Bob, in conventional horror. Friday the 13th, they actually do cut the head off that snake. Horror movie Bloody Moon from the 80s, chopping heads off snakes. Unfortunately, I think I'd have to ask this guy about the Marion Dora film that I'm going to be covering, because it really looks like these people are smothering and killing birds, but they might not do. Practical effects these days are so exceptional.
Sure.
Which is why it's lame to actually use animals. It's so lazy. You just use practical effects. Yeah. So that I'll have to ask.
Yeah. But have you heard about Milo and Otis?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Homeward Bound. Yeah. Milo and Otis.
Oh, what happened?
Those lemmings and from the Disney thing where they fly off the cliff. That's not real. Wait, it's real. They did it. They actually died. But that's not what lemmings do. Oh yeah, I've heard about a lot of these old things. So they got away with a lot of horrific things.
Yeah.
A long time ago.
Milo and Otis, I think, was a Japanese production, though. I think that's how they got away with it, or I don't know. I mean, that's something to cover in your episodes.
Yeah.
You know what? That actually, it would be a really cool discussion to be extreme horror gets such a bad rap, but did you know this Disney film, and did you know this Western from 1965, and they did this.
A lot of that stuff happens. Yeah. It seems like almost more often than in extreme horror in these conventional horror movies. Another one from the 70s, Don't Deliver Us from Evil. It's this Like this,
Oh,
like
yeah.
I find it like the satanic feminism kind of like lesbian girls coming together, and they actually smother and kill birds in it. Jess and I were watching it
Right.
together. I was like, is this real? Yes.
Yeah.
So like even it pops up on stuff you don't even think it will.
Yeah, I remember listening to the episode you guys did on that one, because that's I've seen that film. It's I think it's based on the same story as Heavenly Creatures.
Oh, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what I read going into it. But yeah, that was a creepy film for me because the two girls are like pretty brutalized as well, and they look very young, even though
Very young.
I'm pretty
yeah,
sure
there was a lot of
Yeah.
layers of some problematic elements, and
Yeah. But that to me would be a film that's like taboo, but I wouldn't call it extreme horror.
no, I would agree. I would agree. And so since you brought that up, which is a great point. So if y'all remember Our Bloody Obsession, it was all like extreme blood. Look at this. It was very like punchy, which I loved. I love branding. I love names. I love puns. I love playing with a lot of that. But what I'm kind of doing with Taboo Terrors, and it's kind of in the name. So less of it's extreme horror, more that it's transgressive cinema. It's taboo cinema. Like some of the stuff that I'm covering, like Macabre by Lamberto Bava, is really not that disturbing, but the basis of the movie is about necrophilia. So yeah. So I'm more focusing on transgressive acts in cinema instead of it, but I'm still going to be covering the same type of stuff. It's just kind of approaching it in a different light. It's almost like, and this is my analogy for it, and please tell me if this makes sense, but there's a trend of certain vegan restaurants to not say that they're vegan. They don't say vegan anywhere in it. It's like Cinnaholic. You live here in Toronto. So Cinnaholic is a cinnamon bun franchise that came into Canada from the US. Nowhere does it say that it's vegan, but it is 100% a vegan place.
Oh.
So placing the name of vegan places this already like preconceived notion of what the food's going to be like, what their attitude's going to be like. People already walk in with like, ugh, I don't know if I really want to eat that because it's vegan. But if you don't say it's vegan, it's just something delicious, then they're more apt to eat it. So there are more places adopting this, not saying it's vegan. So it's kind of like, let's not call these transgressive pieces of art, of cinema, extreme horror, even though in a lot of ways they are. And then we can approach it from a more, let's say, open mind and critical lens instead of coming in like, oh, it's just going to be faux snuff, or it's all this fetish gore stuff that, who wants to watch that?
Yeah. I like that more personally because it sounds like it's, for one, it's more broad, and two, it means you can kind of like include some films that are maybe a little more like critically acclaimed, a little more art house, but they just so happen to contain content that is taboo. I don't know if you have any interest in covering something like In the Realm of the Senses, but that seems to me like something that would be perfect for a future episode. Not sure if you're familiar with that one, but
I'm not familiar with it. But like pink films don't. Yeah, there's a lot of wonderful pink films out there, and that is a place that I can't wait to explore. But they're not horror. So a lot of them, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sometimes they are. Like there are
for sure
quite a few that are like borderline slasher films. But
yes, absolutely. But like Sallow, like that's not. You know what I mean? No. Like, and we all could debate this, but like when you think of a horror movie, Sallow not necessarily taboo, transgressive, absolutely, but extreme horror, not necessarily.
Right.
So even though some people, it's like tomato, I guess, we can kind of just get into the semantics of it, but it's just an approach. Like what I'm using and what Zoe and I were using for Our Bloody Obsession is a wonderful extreme cinema web of genres that Quality Violence Cinema made. It's a wonderful thing, but it doesn't like, again, there's fetish in there, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be horror, but it's fetish work. The mixtapes, real gore, pink films, women in prison films, sexploitation movies. Like, sex is still sadly very much a taboo. So I'm more using that web of transgressive cinema to that's why I think so much about what I'm actually going to cover each season, because I really want to like make it diverse, make it interesting. There's going to be stuff that's really explicit, like Aftermath and erotic and the Mary and Dora film, or there's Macabre by Umberto Vava, and the Garotica, like that 90s shot on video, is not the most in your face, but like there's a bunch of necrophilia in it. So
right. Okay. I mean, I can kind of understand, now that because we are kind of wrapping up here, I'm kind of getting a good sense then of like your whole motivation behind doing this, because as you were saying before, horror isn't really providing you with any kind of like shock or anything. So I think ultimately it's like you're kind of exploring all these different things outside of extreme horror to kind of give you some sort of like visceral, reaction. And I think sometimes, maybe this is the hang up of extreme horror, is that you go in and you're like, okay, you gotta shock me. Whereas like you go into a film that's, I don't know, like Kissed, for instance, which I know you're doing, I'm assuming you're covering, right? It might not shock you, but because you're not going in with any preconceived notions, it's going to maybe give you something else. And that something else is more likely something you want to talk about at length on a podcast.
Yes, generally, yes, I would say that. And Kissed, not covering it, but Jess and I did talk about it on I Spin in Your podcast. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like Kissed is it's a mainstream necrophilia film that won like awards here in Canada. It's a Canadian film. Beautiful, lovely film about necrophilia. Necromantic 2 runs in the exploitation realm, right? There's our art house, like bigger budget stuff, and then we have our exploitation, and like I love both. I tend to like my exploitation stuff a little bit more. It's a little bit dirtier, a little bit grimier, into that. But Kissed is not extreme horror, but it is transgressive cinema.
Yeah. It's like finding the disturbing content where you least expect it.
Exactly. And like that doesn't disturb me, but somebody else watching it might be disturbed by. And that's the other thing. Like there's some stuff that's like objectively shocking, like watching the August Underground trilogy, like that'll keep you up at night. But overall, like we're all going to hit on different things, and different things we're going to find different things disturbing. So it's just the concept of necrophilia, I know used to really upset Jess, my co-host, and I Spinning Her podcast. Like that used to be like, she had a hard time approaching that subject. She's like, whoa, that's really intense. And that was really intense for her. And now she kind of, I don't want to say now she loves necrophilia, but like we've covered it. She's coming on my podcast to talk about it again. Yeah. Like it's interesting.
Totally. It is, it's really abrasive to engage with at first. You're right. Okay.
Yes.
Well, yeah, I shouldn't keep you.
That's okay. Let's move on to your...
The questionnaire, yes.
Your questionnaire. Okay. Love this.
Yes. Are you ready? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It might be helpful, this first one. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Because you were sipping on coffee.
No, I'm sipping on water. My stomach doesn't like too much coffee, sadly, but it's also 8 p.m., so I'm drinking water.
Yeah, that's true.
But coffee...
Oh, it's so good. Choose one film for the rest of your life.
Things. Yep, I guess
wow. So. Okay. Really? Okay. I respect.
That came immediately to my head. So, yep.
We're talking
Canadian gem.
Right, yeah, that's a fun one. The director did Wicked World?
Yep.
See, I'm more into Wicked World personally, but Things is fun.
Fair.
Okay, this one, if you don't answer what I'm going to expect you to answer, I'm going to be really mad. If you had to be an animal, which would you choose?
A cat. I'm halfway there.
Okay. You're covered in cat hair.
Covered in cat hair. I want to sleep 18 hours every single day. You know. Yeah.
Cats are great, so I don't blame you.
Ugh, best.
What happens when we die?
Happens when we die. We turn into mush.
Okay. Yeah. That's it? Turn it? No, that I don't
That's
think
it?
anyone's...
That's the questionnaire?
No, there's one more.
Okay.
Song song title that best describes your life.
Oh. It's a Bathory song. Oh my God. What is it called?
There we go.
A Woman of Dark Desires.
Oh, that's good. That is really, really good. Woman of Dark Desires by Bathory. That's off their first album.
It's an older one. It's an older, grimier black metal one. Yeah.
OG black metal's the best.
It's good.
Yeah. Okay. That is the questionnaire. That's all the questions. You gave all the answers. So yeah,
Great.
Thank you so much for your time. Your first episode, when this comes out, would have dropped on August 16th.
Yes.
And then your next episode will drop out after this, which is September 16th.
Yes, the episodes will be monthly and they'll be coming out. We're trying our best here at Taboo Terrors to get it on the 16th of each month. And because I don't think we talked about it yet, how I'm running it is that the first episode is the intro to the season, whereas it's like an audio editorial. So it kind of just amps you up and gets you prepped and primed for the season ahead, the themes, the movies, the ideas, the concepts, the taboo subject matter. So first season's on necrophilia, my favorite paraphilia. So I'm really, really excited. It's going to be very fun.
Nice. And what can we expect for the next episode?
The next episode is going to be on the short Aftermath and from 1994, and that's with Goblin O'Reilly from Quality Violence Cinema.
Okay. He's been on here before, so shout out to Goblin.
I definitely watched that episode. Yeah, the boys, my boys, my weird
your
boys,
my
boys. I blame them for all the scat that I watch now. I don't know.
Oh, that's at least you have someone to blame other than like.
At least I have someone to blame. Yes,
someone to.
Gotta share the burden. Oh,
shit the burden.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will let you go, but thank you so much for your time and have a great night.
Thank you. You too.